Welcome to this private viewing of the documentary Jihad, A Story of the Others, made by the director Deeyah Khan. My name is Kjetil Stormark and I have the honor to be the moderator for this evening. As you probably have understood, this event will be solely done in English for the benefit of our guests from the UK. Our kind hosts for today, the Freedom of Expression Foundation, Fritt Ord, is one of the donors which have made the documentary possible. This is also a sad day for Fritt Ord, following the news of the death of former chairman Francis Sejersted. But also a good day to honor his memory by holding such an important event like this. Following the viewing of the film, we will have a panel discussion with the director Deeyah Khan, as well as Alyas Karmani and Professor Bjørgo will take part. Abu Muntasir is not able to come today because of the death of his mother. Bad news often comes in groups more than one. But I think we will have a really good discussion anyway. But we have the deepest sympathy and understanding why Abu Muntasir can't be here. Finally, we will also open up to questions from the floor as part of the conversation following the viewing of the movie. But first of all, without further ado, let us watch the documentary. I hope Deeyah Khan is still with us. So if Deeyah Khan and Alyas Karmani could come up to the stage, please. Welcome to Bjørgo as well. It is a really touching documentary, I have to say. I was really touched when I saw it the first time myself. This is the third time I'm seeing it, so. But I imagine that you've seen it a few more times, Deeyah, than we have done. But why did you decide to do this? Why?
Yes, I have seen it hundreds of times. But I have to say, it really moves me, or Abu Muntasir and some of the men including me, really move me every time I actually watch it. The reason I decided to do it is that I was not feeling particularly satisfied by the public discourse around the issue of violent extremism and radicalization. I was hearing a lot of talk about, is it politics, is it foreign policy, is it religion, is it this, that and the other, and yes, those are all factors, of course. But it wasn't satisfying for me to hear that, because there is something else. There has to be something else. There has to be underlying human reasons why some of our young people find themselves willing and susceptible to hear this message and to embrace it in the way that they do. So, not finding those answers, I decided just to ask and just to find out myself. So the film was really a sort of personal obsession. To try to really get to the human side of this, to try to see if there are some underlying emotional, psychological reasons why our young people find themselves drawn to this, beyond the sort of the really aggressive rhetoric that we see every single day that is sort of, just very fear and hysteria based. I wanted to get underneath it, I wanted to get past it.
But you have yourself received many threats from extremists. That was one of the reasons why you moved from Norway in the first place.
Yes.
Your friends warned you to do this. They said that it wouldn't be any use in talking to monsters.
Yeah.
Why did you do it anyway? Did you have any doubts? Or were you convinced from the beginning that this was something you really needed to do?
Well, I think that the fact that I've had the experiences that I've had is exactly the reason why I finally needed to look at this and finally face it. I left this country when I was 17 years old, which is now, a little more than 20 years ago, so it's been a while. But this is a movement, this is a trend that's been expanding and becoming stronger through these decades, through the time that I left, and I was always told that, Deeyah, things are going to get better, just leave it to time, these tendencies will just fall away. And the fact of the matter is, it's not fallen away, it's in fact gotten a lot worse. We are seeing more and more of our young people born and raised in the West sucked into this. And I think because of my experiences, so maybe it's selfish of me, maybe it's just wanting, maybe it's self-preservation, wanting to figure out what are we really facing so that we can be more effective in addressing it that drove me. So maybe it's that selfishness, but I think, initially I think it probably was. But I think where I found myself at the end of the project, I entered it very pessimistic, I have to be very honest. I thought, well, this is what it is, maybe I'll learn something, but, so what? But leaving the project, I have to say that I'm actually leaving really hopeful, realizing that change is possible. For men like Abu Muntasir, who used to be one way, and for him to today embrace compassion and non-violence and peace in the way that he does, gives me tremendous hope. And the process of the film was quite awkward. I have to be completely honest. It was quite awkward for me, coming from the background that I've come from, coming from the experiences that I've come from, to sit there and put all my past baggage aside, and to be completely willing to listen, sincerely willing to listen, was hard. But I appreciate that it's forced me to stretch internally as a human being. It's forced me to develop compassion for people that I would ordinarily consider my sort of natural enemy. So if I can do that, then I think...
Do you feel more secure or more at danger after doing this documentary?
I don't feel that danger. I mean, I felt that danger when I was 17 years old. This is 20 years ago. Can't spend your life being afraid. So I stopped being afraid a while ago. And I find it a privilege to get to delve into some of these issues. And no, maybe in practical terms, maybe I am more at risk, I don't really know, but I don't really care, which is more important. Yeah.
And the documentary recently aired on ITV in the UK. What kind of reactions have you received after the documentary was sent on British television?
It's been a mixture. I would say that the overwhelming response has been extremely positive. I was actually bracing myself for a fair bit of negative responses, and there's been some. There's been both sides of it. One side saying that you're a terrorist sympathizer, you're being too nice, you're whatever. So that side, and then there's been the other side saying that you must be some Mossad agent. You're just making Muslims look bad. So I've had sort of both. But I have to say the overwhelming majority has been people saying that they feel like after watching the film that maybe there is some hope, and that after watching the film that they realize that maybe we do have something in common, maybe we can hold on to our shared humanity, maybe we can together work through this, and maybe it's not just black, maybe it's not just darkness, maybe there is a way through it. I mean, I've had people who have lost their family members in 7/7, which was the terrorist attacks in London, writing me really tremendously moving emails saying that they were dreading watching this film, but once they watch it, they found themselves crying and found themselves actually feeling optimistic. That if we remember ourselves to be human beings, if we remember our own humanity, not just the humanity of the other, but our own humanity, maybe we can actually get through this. So those are the types of responses that I've had. I've had people tell me, hey Deeyah, I hate Islam, I hate Muslims, I hate this, I hate that, but wow, maybe there is some hope. Maybe not everyone's all that bad. Maybe people are just people, and that's been really moving for me to hear. So yeah, it's been overwhelmingly positive, but there's been the usual silliness as well. That's to be expected.
Alyas Karmani, welcome to Oslo.
Thank you.
Have you received any reactions after the documentary was aired?
Okay.
And if so, could you describe the contents?
well, thank you.
Positive, negative,
Yeah.
or a combination?
Okay, well, thank you obviously for Fritt Ord for bringing me over here. And I'm quite humbled actually, I'm speaking in English. But us English are terrible at learning other languages, so that's part of the reason. But thank you for tolerating just the one English speaker here, thank you. I think overwhelmingly the response, actually today is the first time I actually enjoyed watching the film. Because you know why? Every time I do something like this, I'm just expecting lots of attack. And this made me sound kind of bizarre. Actually, I stayed at home for 3 weeks after the film. I didn't want to go out. There's a reason. I'm not a shy person, as you can guess. But I did not want to be in fist fights every 5 minutes. I didn't want to get into fights with people. So the British context is a very polarized context. That's the thing, where things are very much, and I think this is part of why I got involved in this project, because this was about not polarizing the issue and looking at human factors and not looking at it from an us versus them perspective. In fact, I don't know if you remember, Deeyah, that when you actually called me up, I thought, oh, another person who wants to talk about extremism. And I actually thought, I'll give her 5 minutes and then I'll just put the phone down. Because I get media calling me literally sometimes every day, asking me to do the same sensationalist stories. The same stories which caricature everyone as extremists, these terrible, demonic people, and then obviously the kind of civilizers on the other side. And that's not helpful in terms of obviously trying to bring people to the middle ground. And it's bizarre in a way that, you know, if you go to my previous experience, this place would be the antithesis, the complete opposite of a place that I would frequent. You know, really, this is everything bad about what, you know, the previous views are. But then now I find forums like this are probably the best forums for creating that middle ground. So that's the, you know, the challenge. You know, I've had, I think some of the people couldn't appreciate some of the comments that I make, especially around sex, because people don't talk about sex. And a lot of my research at the moment is around masculinity and violence. And this is a universal phenomenon, not unique to, you know, one group of men or another. That, you know, there is a you know, problem with masculinity on a global basis because men think that violence is a norm for sorting out problems rather than using emotional intelligence or conflict resolution or other kinds of skills. But sometimes, you know, in a very you could say polarized environment where things are really tense, where people feel under siege, because you've got to realize every day the media is kind of, you know, showing us these kind of very negative stories about Islam, then people can't understand nuance sometimes, and people don't understand complexity. They just want you to fit into a nice convenient camp. You know, are you with us or against us? That's the only way they want to analyze the world. And I think all of us, I hope the film, what it tries to show is that don't choose a side. Understand that, no, this is about humanity, this is about people, this is about journeys. The experience I had, and I never really subscribed to extremist views and incitement to violence, although I was part of an extremist group. And the reasons were nothing to do with global jihad or all these other things. You know, I joined Abu Muntasir because it was the, and I think about it today with some of the young people who are going over to Syria as well. You know, it was the biggest two fingers that I could stick up at everyone. That was it. You know, the first, you know, it was the biggest two fingers I could, you know, if I put the order of who I'm sticking the two fingers up at, it begins with my dad, interestingly. You know, and, you know, I hated him. In fact, just to give you an idea of how Abu Muntasir, the manipulation and the kind of intense kind of feelings. You know, I remember Abu Muntasir telling me a story. I went home to my dad, and we've got to realise this is about what's going on here. Went home to my dad, and I said to my dad, you're a disbeliever, I'm going to kill you. I'm really ashamed to admit that. But that was the anger that I had at my dad, and so I wanted to do everything which could offend him as much as possible. And it's what, you know, is happening with a lot of our young people who feel so disconnected, and I think this, you know, the documentary shows that. It's sticking two fingers up at everybody, at their families, and then they choose a surrogate family. And Abu Muntasir became my surrogate dad, but he was just another tyrant, you know, and he's not here, okay, but I do love him still, you know, at the end of the day, so, but, you know, I can be very honest with him. You know, back then I couldn't say that. I was too scared to be excommunicated by him and cast out by him, because I'd already been cast out by one dad. I can't lose another dad. You know, then it's two fingers also at society, and you've got that in the film as well, that you try to fit in. You know, I grew up in the 70s. I grew up with skinheads, interestingly, and you know, I was an honorary white skinhead amongst them, which is interesting. You do everything you can to fit in, but you know, you're not fitting in. And then, you know, the imams as well. And imams, mosques, you find them absolutely useless in connecting with you on a kind of human level. So it's two fingers up at them. And that's essentially, I think, what we were trying to kind of show. And that's why I got involved in the project, because I said, okay, I want something new, want something, a kind of different perspective. But when you bring something different, that doesn't fit into the box that everyone wants to label you with, of course, it creates problems. You know, and certainly I had one or two kind of hiccups on social media. You get a lot of attacks on social media, and that's why here, being relaxed, watching it, I've got a slightly different perspective than before, which is, okay, now let's see, I'm just going to have to deal with weeks and weeks of criticism. Remember, I wear different hats. I'm an imam as well. I'm a councilwoman in Bradford, in my city. You know, I'm a practitioner, so I wear lots of different hats, so I have to be careful in juggling all those hats. And I think I'll come back onto it, but I think this is also the crux of the issue as well. You have to open the space up so that people can actually express themselves without judgment, without being labelled, without being stigmatized, and people can actually then listen to each other and understand each other. At the moment, the space is too closed.
Just to follow up on one of the points you're making, to what extent is the generation conflict within Muslim communities causing a further growth in radical waves, so to speak, in recruitment to militant Islamist groups?
Disconnect, you can't, again, this is not a unique phenomenon to Muslims. Okay, I think it crosses the board, and I work with young people every day, and young people feel profoundly disconnected from society, and feel disconnected from politicians, from schools, from teachers, from just about everyone. Now, what should happen is that they should gravitate to counterculture. Counterculture is brilliant. It provides a means for young people to express themselves and find themselves. For young Muslims, that counterculture happens to be, you know, for some of them, extremism and violence. Why? Contextualize it, because every day on their social media feeds, they get a non-stop diet of death, destruction, beheadings, killings. You know, look at, you know, if you look at the social media feeds of our young people, you'll see that that's what they're being exposed to. We're not giving them a counterculture which is about hope and about creativity and about art and beauty and mercy and all of the other things. We're not giving them a counterculture which allows them to express themselves in those ways. So in many ways, it's a push factor, okay, towards that. So yes, of course it is. But again, this is not unique. I think perhaps one of the aspects within a lot of Muslim cultures is that, you know, young people can't express themselves to their parents. And when I work with lots of young men, I ask them, can you talk to your parents, your father in particular, about your feelings? Can you tell them, this is how I feel today, Dad, and these are the emotions that I'm having? And they look at me in a strange way. I said, are you crazy? You know, do you know, we don't talk to our dads. You know, is this unique, however, to Muslims? No, I think on an emotional intelligence level, I think this is a universal kind of phenomenon, but it also occurs quite profoundly in Muslim communities, and it creates that vulnerability, because you look for that elsewhere. There's something missing that you're actually looking for.
This is a good chance to introduce Bjørgo, which is a researcher at the Norwegian Police Academy and the Norwegian Institute for International Affairs, NUPI. You've been an advisor and a researcher in the field of countering extremism, more predominantly in the field of right-wing extremism in Norway, which was a challenge in the 1990s. You were the founding father of what we in Norway call the Exit Project, which was founded to help young people leave extremist groups on the right wing and neo-Nazi groups. Could you say a little about what were the important factors for people joining the groups in the first place?
Yeah, what just strikes me when I see this movie is how similar it is to what I saw. Do you hear me? To what I learned when I started to talk to these young people who had joined neo-Nazi groups and right-wing and extreme nationalist groups in the late 80s and early 90s or through the 90s and early 2000s. It was very much the same basic needs which they had not fulfilled, and they were mostly ordinary, the same needs as I had, for acceptance, for identity, for friendship. Some of them had things in their lives which was kind of missing. Some were missing a father figure. We saw exactly the same people like Arne Myrdal and Tore Tvedt were perfect father figures, and they used it. They were very manipulative, in the same way as you described. We saw young people who, for example, one case very similar to yours, who had hated his abusive father, who happened to be a communist. What the perfect way to rebel is to become a neo-Nazi. It's such a powerful thing. And this is a very powerful identity. So it's provocative, it's a perfect way to sort of really make a point of your rebellion. At the same time, it's a place with a strong identity, with strong friendship, a lot of acceptance. People who had special needs, like they were struggling with ADHD or similar problems, found that there were others there like them. And they were much more accepting than the mainstream society. So they felt at home, they felt included, and then they had enemies who turned out to be kind of good enemies because it strengthened their identity, strengthened the group, and they had someone to fight, and it was giving them a very, very powerful identity. But at the same time, they also had this, after a while, this disillusionment, that they realized that leaders were manipulating them. They had this strong longing for belonging and community and friendship, and it turned out that the group was full of paranoia. People didn't trust each other. They thought that the others were infiltrators, and they were kind of exhausted by all this. It was a lot of excitement, but going there kind of infused with adrenaline for year after year is extremely exhausting. It makes you really exhausted. And people were burnt out. They couldn't take it anymore. Always having to look for blitz people around the corner could be fun for a while, but it wasn't in the long run. And they started to long for something else. And some of these people felt stuck. They felt they had burnt the bridges back to mainstream society. They were so stigmatized. Everyone knew they were Nazis, and now they thought of them as monsters. And if they wanted to get out, they felt that they had sort of ruined their future. So, and there was no exit, there was no way out in a way. Although it was also this mythology that you could not leave. It was, they were in there for life, what's the belief. In reality, people were leaving all the time. And some of them just quietly slipped away, but some really were stuck because they were well known. And they had been in the media. They feel that someday there would be, perhaps they could get an education, a good job, and then suddenly someone would point to that picture in the newspaper where they're making a Sieg-Heil salute. Isn't that you? This kind of fear that the future was destroyed, and that was part of the reasons why we tried to develop this exit program.
Could you please just briefly explain the methods used to try to help young people get out of the groups?
Well, I think it was a combination of some very good and inventive policing methods, represented by Bjørgo. He's sitting there. I mean, their group of preventive police officers at Manglerud police station, they developed some new methods like what they call the bekymringssamtale, the preventive dialogue method, the use of parent network groups, which was very powerful in order to mobilize the parents to get the children out. These were kind of to some extent, the starting point. At the same time, we learned a lot from what happened in Brumunddal about, rather than using exclusion, the way to get these people to leave was to include them back into society. So these were the kind of the basic ideas. In the exit program, we had three main goals. One was to try to provide practical help to those who wanted to disengage. The second was to use parental network groups as a resource to get children out. And the third was to provide the police, social workers, schools, teachers, and others who were actually working with young people to understand the processes of becoming involved in these extremist groups and how to get out. I think we were very successful with the latter two goals. With the parental network groups, were successful. The police, in particular, the police security service, took over the idea of facilitating disengagement, and they used the method of bekymringssamtale with great success. We were not quite as successful with providing direct assistance.
Why not?
I think it was quite successful in Kristiansand, the local exit program, not so much at the national level. Perhaps because we didn't have the right people to do that. And I think what happened in Sweden, where they adopted the idea of an exit program, was to use. It was started there by people who had a past in the far right movement, in the white power movement, and they used former Nazis who had some distance to their past. Use them as mentors for new people who wanted to get out, and that was a very successful model. I think that was better than what we could do normally. We wanted to do the same, but we didn't have the right people to do it. The Swedish exit has provided direct assistance to, I think they stopped to count, but there are some, last time they counted, there were around 600-700 people who had received direct assistance to disengage. So that was a very powerful approach. So they succeeded with some of the things we did not succeed quite so well with.
But talking to parents and trying to influence the extremist young kids through their parents, if there is a generation conflict going on, it might be a sort of a demanding strategy somewhat perhaps. But Alyas, you engage also directly in campaigns against extremism. Could you please share with us your thoughts on what is a viable strategy to counter extremism?
I'm not going to get too technical about it. I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, the key thing is about connecting with young people, understanding their lived reality, understanding their world, understanding their perspective, and really connecting with them on that kind of human level. And I will use anything and anything to connect with them. What do I put in my toolbox? Anything that works. Really, it's as simple as that. We use a lot of sport, I use lots of kind of training, we use counselling, we use mentoring, we use media, we empower people to produce their own social media. Anything that works allows you to have that conversation with that young person that then enables them to just open up to you about the experiences that they're having, and that they share those vulnerabilities with you, and you become a magnet for young people. And what enables, I suppose, to connect with, the kids who are most hard to reach, is if you come from that world. It does help. That doesn't mean if you don't come from that world you can't do it. Because, again, just to kind of really deconstruct it to, I think, its kind of core elements. You see, what I found is two things really work. And I used to have a team of about 15, 20 guys working for me on the front line, on the streets, working, connecting with young people, not just on extremism, mainly around gang issues, as well as sexual violence and other issues as well. And what I found is that two things worked all the time. One is what I call continuity, that I'm not here to parachute in and parachute out of the life of a young person, or a person who is vulnerable, because their whole life is exactly that. Their whole life is an experience where people have come in and out, created trust, built connection, and then disconnected, and created even more disillusionment, and more, you could say, disenfranchisement. So don't be there, just be in it for the long term. Be that positive, presence in their life. And some of the people we work with, they find us very irritating. But after about a year, they say, you know what, you're the only person there for me, everyone else has left. And that's why you need the second thing, which is compassion. I genuinely care about the people I work with. They are people who I know where they can end up. I know the dark spaces and places they can end up. I don't want them to go there. So you've got to have these two things: continuity, be there, and compassion. And connect with them in their space. Allow them to kind of express themselves. And I've got to say, on a governmental level, certainly in the UK, that does not in any way reflect our, PREVENT program, which is the state-sponsored program. In fact, the state-sponsored program, I'm not going to take a political position. This is not being political. If anything, in the last 5 years, it has been a push factor, because it does completely the opposite. It dehumanizes, it criminalizes, it stigmatizes, it labels, it closes the space, it pushes people underground into ungoverned spaces. We don't know what's going on, people can't express themselves. All of those are push factors that extremists love. You're pushing people into the hands of ISIS and other groups who have an enormously sophisticated social media machine. Why do they connect? They connect purely because They understand, and it is a lot about grooming as well, because the grooming model is a useful model. They know exactly what buttons to press, and they know what vulnerabilities to exploit. So they know that. So I think this is a major problem. And again, just not to kind of shorten the answer, youth services are so important. And in the UK, with austerity, we've lost probably 80% of youth engagement services in the UK. I don't know what it's like here in Norway. Youth workers, youth workers, I want people to think about, we champions for the youth service. Youth workers are actually lifesavers. That's how it is. And it's an emergency service. Let me tell you why. My workers would go out at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I've been out 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. I go out when people call me. That's what we do. And we'll go to in a place where the police will even fear to tread. They won't go there, okay? Because if you're not in this space, you can't really affect the change. So that's what youth workers do, and we've got to empower youth workers to do that. We can't have also an approach which basically co-opts everyone into the governmental security apparatus. You can't do that. Because my credibility comes because I'm non-governmental, that I'm out there working with young people from a youth-centered perspective, not from a top-down, securitized perspective. So I'm working with holistically on all of the issues that affect them. It's about getting them a home, getting somewhere for them to stay, getting them a job, getting them friends. It's much more than just, oh, are you at risk of extremism? No, you're not. Okay, that's fine, I've done my job. Move on. That's not how you work with young people. So the youth service is a critical service to kind of engage young people in their space, and I think that's, if we really want to be preventative, upstream, and work early on as possible, that's where you've got to put your resource and try and bring about change.
Tore, Norwegian police and justice system has taken a similar path, like in the UK, in trying to combat extremism. What are your views on the strategy chosen by the Norwegian system? I will just point out that this guy is also an advisor to the police, so listen carefully.
I think it's kind of going in two different directions. We have a very strong preventive approach in the police. At the same time, we've seen that, for example, the approach to foreign fighters has been very much a criminal justice approach. When they return back to Norway, they are prosecuted. And even when parents tell the police that their son has returned, they get arrested and seriously prosecuted. I don't think that's a way to win the cooperation of parents. I think we should look more to what they're doing in Denmark, where they have tuned down a little bit about the criminal justice approach to returning foreign fighters and looked more into rehabilitation. It's a very interesting approach in Aarhus, which I think we should learn much about, which has this kind of exit approach. I think what we have to think about what are you mentioned the word narrowing down options. I think that is what is happening. If you have people going to Syria and Iraq, many of them are likely to be very disillusioned by what they see and what they have to take part in, and many of them want to get home. And if they know that what waits for them is 10 years in prison, they are not likely to return home. They are likely to stay, perhaps go to another place where they may end up killing people. I think we need to get them out of that. And there are some hard choices to be done about what kind of approach should we take when in dealing with returning foreign fighters. At the same time, there is a lot of good preventive work being done in Norwegian police, in close cooperation with municipalities, with NGOs, with the Muslim community, and they are sometimes able to turn them back. One of the big challenges, I think, is we've seen some of the methods which were very successful with right-wing extremists, like bekymringssamtalen, this preventive dialogue approach, has been less effective with these young people joining the Prophet's Ummah and similar movements. And we don't probably has something to do with what you mentioned about connection. It's easier for Norwegian police officers to connect with Norwegian-born, native Norwegian, so to speak, young people. There is more trust in the police than it is among minority Muslim kids in Oslo or elsewhere. I think that is, perhaps there have to be other people who do the same work, try to connect with these people, try to talk them out of what they're doing. I know we have seen some good examples of that, but one of the challenges is to how to talk and connect with these young people. And you've shown that it's quite possible. We just need the right people with the right attitude and the right knowledge and the credibility in order to do it. And I think it is very possible. And we also see that disillusionment is a very normal thing to happen in these groups. Quite a lot of them go in there with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of idealism, and they get disillusioned and want to get out. And we have to make sure we don't close the door for them.
Deeyah?
I just wanted to add a little bit to that, to just say that, you know, native Norwegians versus not native Norwegians and who is legitimate in terms of engagement. I think we all have to actually take responsibility for our children, whatever they look like, whatever background they come from. And I think that's one of the lacking factors in the last, so I've been gone for 20 years. And again, a lot of people told me time will heal all. And I think one of the things that has not been healed is that we've not arrived at a point where we are able to engage with all of our children as if they are our children. We are engaging with children of minority communities as problem children of those people. And I think that is something that's going to have to stop, and I think we're all going to have to take responsibility and play our part in that. And I think we're all going to have to get better at being citizens and being fellow human beings in a society that is working for a future that actually includes all of us and that has space for all of us. Doesn't matter how messed up we are, doesn't matter how many mistakes we make. We have to make sure we don't actually give up on each other, and we have to make sure that we don't constantly other. You use that term in the film as well, and it's so true. Those people do this, these problem children are doing that. The problem with that kind of rhetoric, as true as it might be, is that it actually perfectly fits into their story. Extremists want us to become us and them. They want it to become, they actually want this conflict to take place. So one of the most effective ways, I believe, to destroy that is to do the opposite. Is to actually, I'm not trying to be too sentimental, but you know, it is about more love. It is about more compassion. It's about more kindness. It really sincerely is. They don't expect that. You know, one of the responses that I had from the film is from actually a young man, a British Muslim man who's in Syria, and his response to the long ranting response was, "Why are you making us look weak? Why are you making us look like losers? We're really important. We're courageous. We're brave. We're this, that, and the other." And I was sitting there, you know, thinking about this, and the fact of the matter is, he doesn't want to become a human being in our eyes. He wants us to fear him, because fear and respect is a confusing. You know, if you can't be respected, you'll settle for being feared. We cannot fall for the trap that they're setting for us, which is, let's increase the distance between our communities. Let's hate each other more. Let's fear each other more. Let's fall farther apart from each other. We need to do the opposite. And one of the things, actually, you know, the right-wing sort of fascist white power movements, you know, one of the guys I was listening to in the US, one of the things that he said that de-radicalized him was kindness. It was kindness and caring from a black woman. So from the other. So I think we all have a role we can play in this. I don't think this is just up to security services or to the police. I think it's wonderful what they're doing, a very important part of the puzzle, but it's not the only part. I think we all have a part to play. And I would also like to say, being born in this country, the way that you are reflected in the society that you live in is really important. And we cannot underestimate the power of a young Muslim man or a young woman from minority communities walking past VG, Dagbladet newspapers, national newspapers here, and the only reflection you see of yourself is that of a gang member, is that of a criminal, or that of a terrorist.
Thomas, sorry about a surprise attack. He's not aware of this. Thomas? I just want you to be present, so I don't sort of report it or recite some of your work inaccurately. You've done research that shows creating a data set of returned foreign fighters, that 1 out of 9 was seen to commit terrorist acts. It is still a significant number, but have you done any follow-up work recently to see if there's any developments, if the ratio increases?
Yes. But first of all, that 1 in 9 number has been widely misinterpreted.
Okay.
It's a maximum.
Good thing I asked you to be present here then. Go ahead.
So it's a maximum estimate, and it's probably lower than that. But in any case, we recently looked at the numbers for foreign fighters in Syria, of which there are about 4,000 or 5,000 from the West. We basically looked at all of the various attack plots that had been reported in open sources between 2011 and June 2015, and looked for traces of returning foreign fighter involvement in each of those plots. We could only identify, I think it was 11 individuals. Now this is only based on open sources. Many of these cases have not been fully investigated. So there's under-reporting, but still we're probably not talking about more than 50 individuals.
So that means that there may be preventive cases that didn't make it into the public domain?
Well, there are probably many reasons why the rate is low, but I think the first thing to note is that the rate is very low. It's lower than 1 in 100 so far for Syria.
Okay.
All kinds of reasons why that would be the case, but we don't have to.
But I know that as an academic researcher at the Norwegian Defense Research Institute, I forgot to introduce you, that you hate second guessing, but if you were to be challenged on the possible development for the future, what would you answer?
Regarding what?
The ratio, whether the sort of decline or increase?
I think it will stay low, because IS so far at least doesn't appear to be systematically kind of weaponizing the foreign fighters and sending them back, and because it's been so easy to go to Syria that there's been no what we call sort of selection for ideological commitment. So it's a larger, kind of more heterogeneous sample of people, and then the kind of the proportion of that sample that is, is radicalized to the extent of wanting to attack civilians in the West is probably lower than in conflicts where it was much harder to get to, where people were kind of selected for commitment to the work. So I expect it to remain low, but let's bear in mind that the gross numbers are very high. So even if the rate is low, we're still talking about a substantial number of attackers and potential plots.
Thank you so much. We will open the floor to questions. If there is anyone who wants to go have a try at the panel or offer any sort of views themselves. Deeyah, in Norway there's been quite an uproar after Norwegian Police Security Service raided the home of Norwegian movie maker Ulrik in June, seizing material recordings he had done following one of the main sort of Islamist groups in Norway, Profeten Summa. Have you been the subject of interest from the UK intelligence apparatus yourself? Something that you don't want to go into?
No, I have not. it is something that I was conscious of, and something that I put some thought into. That was that to happen, how was I going to react to it? But thankfully, no, that has not been the case.
What's your reaction to the thing that happened in Norway?
I have to be honest, I actually don't know all the details. But something similar happened to a friend of mine in the UK. She's a filmmaker. She actually made a film about gangs in Birmingham, violent gangs. And the police actually demanded that she hand over all of her footage. She was making a film over the course of a year, I think. And that she hand over all her footage so that they could, surveil and question people about various other activities. And she refused. And she was dragged to the courts, put through a very difficult process, but actually won. She actually won.
Were you afraid that you might be, that you could have been the subject of a gag order, which is not uncommon in the UK?
No.
If the justice system somewhat believed or feared that your movie would be sort of an arena to preach militant Islamism?
No, I believe in free speech, even when I don't particularly like the people saying things that I don't like or agree with. So if that would have happened, I would have fought that very strongly. Yeah.
Just a brief question to Tore. What would you say were the most important factors when people started, the right-wing extremists started considering leaving the groups? Be very brief, because we have questions from the floor as well.
I think the general reason is disillusionment. People are fed up. They are disappointed. It wasn't quite what they expected. The group was not as characterized by true friendship as I hoped for. Leaders were manipulative. They realized that they were in a losing cause. I think that is the main general reason. But people are disillusioned for different reasons. Some are more politically disillusioned, others for friendship, and some because it's just not what they were there for.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm not sure which of you on the second row were first, but or the third row. Sorry.
Hello, thank you very much for a really interesting and touching movie, I have to say. I'd just like to ask you briefly, I've been really interested in Great Britain, coming from there and having a South Asian background, and I've been talking to lots of British Asian guys about why they become extremists. And what really puzzles me, Great Britain has had Muslims for so long, and British Muslims have made it in Great Britain. They have high positions in society, and even the Times had a huge article about how Oxford and Cambridge are basically dominated by South Asians these days. And at the same time, you have so many young Asians with your backgrounds, being Pakistani, Bangladeshi, you still opt to become extremists, to become radicals, to embrace this strain of Islam. And I really, really cannot comprehend why girls and boys in Britain, when they have all the possibilities in the world to make it, they still embrace these strange values. I don't know if you can have any way of shedding some light so I can understand you better.
Well, I don't know, I think that's what we've been trying to do, really.
Exactly, I really cannot understand.
Yeah. I think, look, each case is absolutely unique. Again, in my own case, as I said, I never hated British society. I didn't have empathy towards other human beings. It was blind idealism, being part of a movement. You've got to realise, young people want to change the world. And, in apolitical societies where we don't empower young people to be change makers, then they feel quite disaffected by that. And this is the kind of very disturbing way of changing the world. It's also about youth counterculture. I love dressing up. I loved wearing these crazy clothes, yeah. And, so that was, again, part of the whole experience. You see, I'm not going to say it was because I hate the West, because it wasn't. And in fact, I've worked with individuals for 20 years, and do you know what? They're profoundly conflicted, because on the one hand, they're using all this rhetoric. On the other hand, they love to be part of British society. And they realise British society is brilliant for Muslims. And you know what? Okay, I can't wait to get down to the fish and chip shop, or I can't wait. So profoundly kind of conflicted in a way as well. So each case is very, very unique. Some people are emotionally damaged, some people, again, anger, frustration. And one of the ways I try to sum up in the film is talking about what I call the war on terror generation. Now imagine, look, and Deeyah just touched on it as well, your formative years, growing up, and all you see in the media, non-stop, is death, destruction, okay, chaos, confusion. That's your whole world.
But
And
that isn't the whole world in British media. Sorry, I'm just going to, that is not the whole world in
That-
British
that-
media,
that's
or
their-
in Western media today, if you ask me.
okay, you know,
The majority of it
we
is
can,
though.
we can kind of agree to disagree on that. But again, it's not about your experience is brilliant, you know, if it's been positive and enriching and others. You know, in the heartlands where, you know, if you're young and Muslim, you're more likely to live in a deprived area, you're more likely to be discriminated, you're more likely to experience social exclusion. There's lots of siege factors. And these, for this particular generation, who for the last 13 years, since 9/11, that's why I think one of the important things that needs to happen, you've got to change the war on terror paradigm. You can't have a war in which 1.3 million people have been killed, in which there has been enormous collateral damage, and that there is destruction of large swathes of the Muslim world. You can't have that and not think that there's going to be some kind of a blowback in terms of anger and frustration. And you heard in the film, young Muslims are angry, and I think they've got a right to be angry. But what's not happening is that we're not channeling that anger into something constructive, into something positive, and something that actually brings about positive change. Unfortunately, that's the disconnect process, which people use that anger and they channel it towards more self-destruction and nihilism. So this is part of the problem in terms of deconstruct. And I think, look, it's not about British society, it's about your own families. 9 out of 10 so South Asian families, you can't talk to your parents. You know, you feel very disconnected from them. The expectations that South Asian parents put on their children are unrealistic. You know, and in fact, if anything, you know, it's parents who dehumanize their children because they see their children as objects that they just use for their own personal kind of, you know, kind of achievement. You know, and young people need to be given that space where they can be who they want to be. And again, let's get it into proportion, into context. You're right, you know, because I don't want to over-exaggerate it. In the UK context, 3 million Muslims, 50% of the community is under the age of 25, it's very young in its profile. The estimate top number is 500 people have gone to Syria. That's not even 0.001% of the community. So you're absolutely right, 99.9% of the community don't have a problem. So, and that's what we've got to do. We've got to define that as the paradigm, not the 0.001. And that's what's happening in terms of, you know, Muslims cannot escape that whole view that, you know, around terrorism and extremism. And I do this as a little kind of, you know, exercise. You know, I ask people to think about what does a terrorist look like? The whole concept has already been manufactured in our psyche, I'm afraid. And it looks like me more than it looks like you. Okay, and I've had to deal with that. I don't wear a Muslim badge, I'm a Muslim. I'm just an ordinary person, just happens to be Muslim. But society never makes me forget the fact that who I am. This is part of the problem. I've always been othered. You know, my whole experience for years and years, even though I'm knocking on 50 now, you were supposed to say, oh, he doesn't look that old. But, okay, but you know, I'm still being othered. I still have that experience, you know, of, you know, the media, for example, after years and years of the work I've done, you know, I don't want to make it personal, you know, still attacks me as an extremist. You know, the government considers me to be an extremist still, you know, because I challenge the government narrative and I'm outspoken on issues. So, you know, your whole life experiences are being othered, you know. Again, so that's part of the kind of process. So you're pushing people towards that direction. But again, I don't want to exceptionalize Muslims. You see, this is part of the whole problem as well. Muslims are the same as just anyone else. They're just regular people. The more you exceptionalize them, the more you create a victimhood mentality that actually pushes them, well, that this is the only kind of channel that is available to them. Treat Muslims just like normal people, just like anyone. Normalize the paradigm, and then you'll find that actually you will stem that trickle of individuals towards that particular path.
We need to shorten both the questions and answers in this Q&A session in order to be able to include further questions before we have to wrap up things. But one more question, please.
I'll be short because the previous speaker, he answered quite a lot of what I was going to ask. But I was addressing I mean, there are two sort of major narratives in global politics today. And one is that the war on terror is justified and good, and the other is that IS and sympathizers, etc., etc. They are backgrounds and so on and so forth. But I was thinking of the film. I want to go back to the film because I felt there that politics was part of it. I mean, there's a series of disillusionments from the parents to the society marginalizing to the political disillusionment, and then the disillusionment when you see what Alyas is really like if you go there. But then again, if you have all this disillusionment and you have all this political anger too, I was wondering, I know footage in a film is much larger than what comes out, and I was wondering how much did you prioritize this political part of it, or was it did you have any difficult choices there between all the other disillusionments and the political one?
Well, the disillusionments, as you say, are wide-ranging, and it comes down to the individual, as you say. Each case is very different. But for me, my constant focus was to try to bring it back to the human reality. What is the lived experience of a lot of these young people, and what are the human drivers for them? Yes, the political disillusionment is there. Yes, religious factors are there. Yes, social, economic, familial, honor-related, community-related pressures are very prevalent. Gender-specific aspects are very prevalent when it comes to questions of masculinity, which is something we've spoken actually at great length about, and the expectations of that. But I think one of the most important things for me was, again, the human-centric perspective. And I want to answer your question a little bit differently. You know, when it comes to the political disillusionment, it's almost as if this movement has co-opted suffering. Yeah? It's almost as if this movement has some kind of a monopoly on suffering. And in January, in fact, I did an event in Oslo where I brought together, you were there, but I also brought together a lot of people who are resisting this movement. And I walked around the streets of Oslo, and there was nothing but Kjetil Stormark and some other, bearded criminal guy on all the front covers of all the newspapers. And all the, for me, stories, obviously that's one of the reasons I've chosen to now work in stories. Stories are so important. Stories set the culture that we live in. It sets the way that we look at ourselves and the way that we look at each other. And the prevalent public stories that we're telling at the moment are not completely accurate. And in fact, they're feeding into the narrative, if you will, of hatred and of fear. We know more about Bin Laden and Zarqawi and Alyas and all these various things than we know about the people who are fighting them. There are people dying, arrested, suffering every single day in the Middle East and also in our communities, in the diaspora communities in the West. But very rarely do you ever get to hear about this resistance movement, this silent resistance that's there, that's being choked out and damaged every single day. So that's part of our responsibility as well. How come is it that we're not engaging with the correct allies of ours in this struggle? So I think when it comes to role models, when it comes to positive stories of people who are facing this beast, it is a beast, facing it down, we don't get to hear about it. We don't get to hear about the heroes. We get to hear about the villains every single day. I'm sick of it, and it was part of the reason I chose to highlight men like Alyas and some of the other men who might have experienced whatever they've experienced. We all have our past, we all have our stuff, but how we choose to engage with it today is what really matters. And so for me, heroes are important. A counter story is really important, and resistance is really important. This movement did not appear yesterday. This movement has been breeding and growing and spreading over the last, in its modern incarnation, for at least the last 35 years. Its first victims used to be us, women, within these communities. And then it used to be other minorities within these communities, and nobody cared. Nobody cared when we suffered. Today, their guns are pointing to Europe, and today everybody's waking up. So what we need today is to make the correct alliances, is to wake up and realize that this is a long-term struggle, but it cannot be a purely securitized struggle. We're gonna have to do the things that we were hoping time would fix. The things that we don't want to do, which is to take part of the responsibility. So we have to do that. I don't think I've completely answered your question, but I think it's important to express some of this.
One of the panelists have a flight out of Gardermoen tonight, so we will need to wrap it up soon. I've told in 2 minutes, but if the final question is really quick and the response increasingly so, please have a go. Was a question? Yeah. But you have to be very quick.
Very quick. If we translate this to international policy, then it's very easy for the politicians to build up enemy pictures. And Shireen Ebadi, she is a lawyer from Iran, and she is also a laureate from the Nobel Peace Prize. She has said, and she says, that if America had thrown books instead of bombs, then we would never have IS. Any comments to that? Especially from you.
Any givers?
Well, just I would totally agree. The pen is mightier than the sword. And a similar comment when a library closes down, a prison opens up. So you're absolutely right. It's ideas that change the world. And when young people feel that there's no space for ideas, then they resort to violence. Unfortunately, they see violence as a solution. So that's part of changing the paradigm.
Okay, that was what we were able to get time for tonight. Thank you so much for everybody who attended. Thank you especially to the panelists, Deeyah Khan, to Bjørgo, and our distinguished guest from the UK. You deserve, together with Abu Muntasir and everybody else who participated in the documentary, our respect and admiration for actually doing this with everything that it entails. So thank you so much, and have a good night.